Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. "A-okay," Lucian said, then took Estella back to the Farwell residence. Soon after, the black Bentley drove away. A camera flashed in the grass in front of Roxanne's house, and a man appeared from the grass afterward. While processing the photographs he had just taken, he hurriedly got into his car and tailed Jack's, which was heading toward the research institute. Roxanne tried to suppress her worries about Estella on the way to the research institute. She began asking about matters related to Herbscape Group. "I was in a rush to leave just now. How are things with Herbscape Group going?" Roxanne really wanted to know if Herbscape Group had actually done those things. Or if Lucian's business strategies were so terrifying that they allowed him to pass off fake as genuine. A hint of displeasure flashed across Jack's eyes. However, his tone was warm when he spoke to Roxanne. "It's probably not optimistic." Roxanne furrowed her brows. She had a theory in mind. Herbscape Group is involved in a plethora of matters. I'm afraid the ones that have been exposed online were just the tip of the iceberg. Now the relevant departments are involved. I don't know how much trouble it's going to cause. Jack sighed as his head began to hurt. Roxanne frowned. "But didn't you guys look into it at that time?" Given the Damaris family's influence, it seemed unlikely that they did not know about the details of Herbscape Group. Jack chuckled bitterly. "We have scoured the entire Herbscape Group, but we wouldn't be able to find anything if someone purposely covered for them." After that, he added meaningfully, "In particular, that person must be as powerful as the Damaris family, not to mention better at business than the Damaris family." Speaking of which, the Damaris family is just prominent in the pharmaceutical industry. Jack was insinuating that someone had set up a trap for the Damaris family with Herbscape Group's matter, and Lucian was the only person who could have set up the trap. Naturally, Roxanne understood what Jack was saying, but she did not know how to respond. After some time, Roxanne could not help but ask, "If that's the case, why are they doing this? There's no benefit to this." There was a glimmer in Jack's eyes, and he said self-deprecatingly, "Perhaps I touched something I shouldn't have." Roxanne's eyelashes quivered. A peculiar sensation swelled within her, and she lowered her head silently. Jack's insinuation was so obvious that it was hard for her to disregard it. Sensing her avoidance, Jack decided to stir the pot. "I've learned from this experience that this so-called business genius lives up to his name. He has my sincere acceptance of my defeat, but the only thing I regret is that the price this time was higher than I had anticipated." He was basically implying that Lucian was the mastermind. Roxanne was the only thing that associated him with Lucian other than Herbscape Group. Roxanne's hands on her knees stiffened as she suppressed the strange feeling in her heart. She changed the subject nonchalantly by saying, "I hope this matter won't impact our project." "I hope so too. Hopefully that person will be merciful." Jack added fuel to the fire. Roxanne's heart pounded harder when she heard his words. However, she tried to convince herself that Lucian and Jack's fight would not be beyond Herbscape Group. Aubrey had been staying in the Farwell residence for some time, but Lucian had hardly ever gone there. Sonia had tried to make her stay, but she eventually left. She had chosen to stay in the Farwell residence, as she had thought Lucian would often visit because of Sonia and that she could spend more time with him. However, after so long, she had only met him a handful of times. Instead, the private detective had been sending her photos, and Roxanne had always appeared next to Lucian in those photos. Rage burned in Aubrey every time she looked at them, yet she had to keep her emotions in check, as she had to face Sonia and Elias every day. Aubrey finally had enough as time went on. She found an excuse to return to the Pearson residence by saying she had reconciled with her father. After all, she had already achieved her goal with yesterday's photos. Aubrey? Why are you back? Where's Lucian? Gina was relaxing at home when she suddenly saw Aubrey coming in with her luggage. As she had not been speaking much to Aubrey during this period of time to prevent the Farwell family from finding out about their lies, she did not have the slightest clue about Aubrey's situation in the Farwell residence. Aubrey threw her luggage to the side and had a scowl on her face as she sat on the couch. Gina could not stop glancing at the door. They had staged this act in an effort to change Lucian's mind. Since Aubrey had returned, Gina reckoned Lucian must have changed his mind and sent Aubrey home. Yet, she did not see his future son-in-law at all. Stop looking. I came back alone, Aubrey snapped, knowing what her mother was thinking. Surprise flashed across Gina's eyes when she heard that, and she rushed to sit on the couch. What's going on? Did you fight with Lucian again? Without waiting for Aubrey to respond, Gina began. It wasn't easy for you to move into the Farwell residence. Didn't I tell you to control your temper to appease Lucian? Aubrey looked daggers at her mother. Am I not humble enough in front of Lucian? In the past 6 years, she had been like an entirely different person compared to her normal self when she was in front of Lucian. I'm not inferior to that B*TCH in any way. I'm more obedient than that B*TCH too. But Lucian is just so madly in love with that B*TCH. There's nothing I can do about that. I'm so sick of pretending in front of the Farwells every day. Aubrey slammed the couch angrily. Despite feeling sorry for her daughter, Gina said, Aubrey, we've been waiting for so many years. Wouldn't it all be for nothing if we gave up now? She sighed and continued, how can I bear to let you suffer this grievance? Think about it, after a storm comes a calm. It will all be worth it after you get married to Lucian. We will have anything we want. Aubrey furrowed her brows and clenched her fists. It's not like I want to give up. It's just that Lucian is not giving me the chance. Aubrey's phone suddenly vibrated twice when they were talking. Both of them turned to look at the phone in unison. Aubrey glanced at it and knew the private detective had sent more photos again. A grim look appeared on her face when she thought about the photos she had been receiving these days. Except for the photos from yesterday, all the other photos were basically of Roxanne and Lucian being together. She had had enough of seeing them getting intimate with one another. A crease appeared between her brows when she tapped on the message to look at the photos. What's wrong? Who texted you? Gina wanted to say more, but when she saw that Aubrey was lost in her thoughts, she craned her neck and saw the photos on the phone. Isn't that the son of the Damaris family? Numerous thoughts raced through her mind as she spoke. A little while later, she asked dubiously, Are the discussion on the internet some time ago real? Did Roxanne really use Jack to join the Damaris family's project? But if something is going on between the two, there's no way Lucian. Gina was bewildered for a long time. Aubrey flashed a mocking smile. Even you think that those rumors are true. Perhaps these photos can serve some purpose. At the very least, it would influence Sonia in the way she desired. What do you mean? That guy from the Damaris family and her. Gina wanted more information. If Roxanne is actually seeing Jack, there's no way she can marry into the Farwell family when Sonia is aware of it. It doesn't matter even if Lucian likes Roxanne. Aubrey narrowed her eyes coldly. Does it really matter if it's true or false? It's true if the key person believes it. With that, Aubrey quickly switched her SIM card and sent the newly received photos to Sonia. Gina froze for a few seconds when she watched Aubrey's movements. Then she smiled in relief. I know my daughter won't give up so easily, but I didn't expect her to do so much behind me. I'm curious about Sonia's reaction when she sees those photos. Meanwhile, in the Farwell residence, Sonia felt bad for Aubrey after sending her off. She had been trying to convince her son to propose to Aubrey for so many years, yet there had been no progress in their relationship. Instead, Roxanne had been playing with her son's feelings. As a woman herself, Sonia felt very bad for Aubrey,
who had sacrificed a lot. Elias descended the stairs and was ready to head to the company to settle some matters when he saw his wife's troubled expression. At the sight of him, Sonia got up and walked to him. "You're heading to the company?" Elias gave an indifferent nod. After a brief moment of hesitation, Sonia asked gently, "I don't think we can delay Lucian's marriage with Aubrey anymore. Why don't you speak to him about it? He should listen to you." Elias had guessed what was bothering his wife when he came down the stairs. Sonia had had this expression on her face for the past few days. Elias held her hand and murmured, "You let him do what he wants."
Sonia did not expect him to say such words. Elias had consistently backed her even though he had not explicitly stated his stance throughout the years. Yet now he had made his stance to support his son. "Are we going to let Aubrey down after all the years she has waited?" Sonia tried to persuade him. Elias knitted his brows and a hint of helplessness appeared in his eyes. "Both of them are my family, yet their opinions are clashing now." After a moment of silence, Elias sighed and uttered, "You guys can do whatever you want. I'm not good at dealing with situations like these. I still have things to deal with at the company. You can have lunch yourself later." Since he had to deal with work, Sonia could only send him to the door reluctantly. Although she felt slightly dissatisfied, she still reminded gently, "Come back early tonight. Don't wear yourself out." Elias nodded and drove away. Just as Elias' car disappeared from sight at the entrance of the door, the butler's voice rang beside her ear. "Mrs. Farwell, you seem to have received a message on your phone." Sonia turned around in confusion after hearing this. Her heart sank when she tapped on the screen and saw the unknown number. She knew this number even though it was an unknown one. "It's the same person who sent me the photos yesterday and they're sending me more photos now." Sonia felt inexplicably despondent. She hurried over to the couch and tapped to look at the pictures with a scowl. Roxanne and Jack could be seen chatting happily in the photos. The location was different from yesterday as those photos were taken in front of Roxanne's house this time. The two young boys were standing next to Roxanne and watching them. Sonia had seen these two children and knew that they were Roxanne's sons. So Jack must be getting along well with her sons. From the photo, the atmosphere around them seemed quite harmonious. Sonia's face fell and she could not help but think about the discussion on the internet some time ago. For 2 days in a row, Roxanne had been with Jack. Furthermore, they looked intimate. I'd be foolish to keep wondering if the discussion online was real or not. With this in mind, Sonia got up furiously. "Mrs. Farwell, where are you going?" The butler followed after her in confusion when he saw her walking toward the door. Without turning around, Sonia responded coldly, "I'm heading to the Pearson residence. Tell Lucian to find me there if he comes home." "He understood," the butler said, then watched Sonia get into the car and drive off. Sonia had wanted to ask Aubrey to go with her. However, she changed her mind after realizing that Aubrey had just left the house and calling Aubrey back would be a hassle. Furthermore, it could be said that she had a favor to ask of Aubrey by making this trip. "Even without all these photos, I still need to clarify things with Aubrey. Roxanne will do anything to rise to greater heights. What a despicable person. No matter what, I will never allow her to marry into the Farwell family. I still want to maintain my dignity, and Roxanne can continue to be shameless for all she wants." Back at the Pearson residence, Aubrey went back to her room after sending the message. She didn't know what Sonia's reaction would be, but she was sure Sonia's impression of Roxanne would be completely ruined. Gina was still sitting downstairs, wondering if she should call Sonia and add fuel to the fire. Just when she took out her phone and was about to make the call, her doorbell suddenly rang. Gina kept her phone and went to open the door. She was surprised to see Sonia standing there. Where's Aubrey?" Sonia smiled gently at Gina, suppressing her anger. Only then did Gina regain her senses and realize this visit was the effect of the photos Aubrey had sent, but she didn't know what Sonia was going to say. Gina could barely suppress the smugness in her heart. After some time, she pointed to the room upstairs and said she came back early in the morning and went upstairs. She seems to be in a bad mood, but I didn't dare to ask. Upon hearing that, Sonia felt slightly apologetic. Gina pretended not to know as she asked, "Did Aubrey and Lucian get into a fight again?" "I asked her, but she wouldn't say anything." Sonia forced a smile at the mention of Lucian. "As long as I'm here, I won't let Lucian bully Aubrey. Don't worry." As for whether they had gotten into a fight, Sonia was hesitant to reply. The two had barely met, and every time they did, they rarely spoke to each other. How could they even get into a fight? "I'll go up to check on Aubrey." Sonia did not give Gina any opportunity to ask further and walked upstairs. Gina agreed and followed behind Sonia. In the room, Aubrey was contemplating what else she could do with the photos when she heard a knock on her door, followed by her mother's voice. "Hey Aubrey, don't be angry anymore. Mrs. Farwell is here to see you." Although it sounded like words of comfort, it was more of a warning, reminding Aubrey what kind of attitude she should have when facing Sonia. Aubrey understood, and in a matter of seconds she kept her phone and plastered an aggrieved expression on her face before opening the door. "Mrs. Farwell, what brings you here?" Aubrey's eyes were filled with concern. "You could have called me if there's anything. I would have gone to you." Aubrey then led Sonia into her bedroom and sat on the edge of her bed. Upon seeing the unhappiness on Aubrey's face and hearing such thoughtful words, Sonia felt her heart wrench. "I'm sorry." Aubrey felt smug when she heard that, but she wore an innocent and shocked expression as she asked, "Mrs. Farwell, why are you saying that?" Sonia let out a sigh. "It must have been tough for you after all these years. But don't worry. I will never let anyone marry into the Farwell family except for you." Aubrey pretended to be touched. "Mrs. Farwell, you said that to me many times. I have always believed you and am very grateful to you. Did something happen?" Sonia furrowed her brows and sighed again. "It's about Roxanne. I thought she had only abandoned her husband and kids. I can't believe she even..." Remembering Roxanne's disposition and Lucian's unfaltering love for her, Sonia felt ashamed. Her cheeks flushing, she suggested, "Let's change the topic. In any case, if she marries into the Farwell family, we'll be utterly humiliated." Aubrey's eyes glinted coldly and imperceptibly. She did not probe further and simply comforted Sonia. Before she could get out of the car, Roxanne saw that Colby was already waiting at the entrance of the research institute. She was surprised. It's the weekend today, so no one should be working at the research institute, including Colby. There's not much going on here for him to work overtime. Although I need to move the medicinal herbs and devices, I didn't ask him to come. What is he doing here? Mr. Damaris. Upon seeing the two get out of the car, Colby walked over and greeted Jack first politely before turning to Roxanne. Dr. Jarvis." Roxanne sensed something amiss, but she dismissed it as her overthinking. She smiled and greeted in return, "Dr. Galloway." Colby nodded in acknowledgement. "There's nothing much to do at the research institute today, so why are you?" Roxanne could not help but ask. Colby glanced at them and responded with a hint of disappointment and frustration in his voice, "If there's nothing much to do, then what are you two doing here?" Roxanne froze for a few seconds. "Am I imagining things? Why does Colby sound as if I've abandoned him?" For some reason, Roxanne felt rather guilty. "I'm sorry. I should have informed you. But I thought we could manage, so I didn't want to trouble you." Only then did Colby laugh nonchalantly. "I was just joking. I was bored today, so I came to take a look. I didn't expect you guys to come too, he said before glancing at Jack calmly. Upon meeting Colby's eyes, Jack frowned. Since we met, is there anything I can help with? Colby offered. After glancing at Jack, Roxanne replied, if it's all right with you, you can help us move the medicinal herbs. I feel more assured with you here. As she had been working with Colby the longest out of all the employees at the Research Institute, she trusted him the most. Colby nodded with a smile. Quickly the three of them and Jack's assistant got to work. Are these medicinal herbs from Herbscape Group? Colby inquired while moving the herbs. At the mention of Herbscape Group, Roxanne could not help but think of Lucian, and the expression on her face changed. Jack, who was beside her, nodded. Fortunately, Miss Jarvis is meticulous. I checked it, and I believe she has brought all the medicinal herbs and equipment we can use. Hearing that, Roxanne snapped back to her senses and pursed her lips absent-mindedly. It's what I should do. Jack smiled in understanding. Seeing the two getting along so well, Colby felt an uncontrollable surge of jealousy, and his gaze darkened. I wonder how Herbscape Group will develop in the future. Quelling his jealousy, Colby continued nonchalantly, I remember they almost got acquired by Farwell Group. Their only way out is for Farwell Group to take over, right? But with the scandal, I wonder if Farwell Group is still willing to acquire Herbscape Group. Roxanne's heart skipped a beat. If Farwell Group really acquires Herbscape Group, then Farwell Group must be the one behind the scandal. At that thought, Roxanne felt somewhat guilty.
I believe Mr. Farwell will be happy to. Jack said ambiguously before glancing at Roxanne. Roxanne had sharp senses and could feel Jack's eyes on her. When he heard his words, her feeling that something was off intensified. Colby's eyes also darkened when he noticed Jack's cryptic gaze. Although he didn't know the truth behind many of the incidents, Jack's eyes revealed many things. Last time, when Roxanne was under fire, I remember Farwell Group took action in the end. This time, she became Herbscape Group's technical advisor, and soon, Herbscape Group was involved in a big scandal. No one would believe it if Lucian didn't do all those things for her. Moreover, I saw him appear in her house in the middle of the night. Lucian and Roxanne are already so close. Now, there's Jack in the picture. Colby's heart was filled with jealousy when he realized how competent the other men around Roxanne were compared to him. I have no chance of competing with them unless I can be like them and be more outstanding than Roxanne. I must be as good as her at the very least. Roxanne was also spacing out, feeling conflicted about Lucian and Estella. Miss Jarvis, watch out. Just when she was lost in her thoughts, Jack's voice sounded behind her, pulling her back to reality. Roxanne stopped in her tracks, but it was too late. As her mind was filled with thoughts about Lucian and Estella, she didn't notice where she was walking, resulting in her losing her footing. Then she felt herself leaning forward. Roxanne's heart clenched, and she didn't even have time to scream. She only hugged the medicine tight against her chest. It wasn't easy for them to obtain the herbs, so it would be a huge loss if they were damaged. She slipped down a few flights of stairs, and just when she was about to slam into the ground, a pair of strong arms grabbed her waist and steadied her. Roxanne finally caught her balance and took a few deep breaths, holding on to those arms before calming down. Are you okay? Jack asked as he helped her stand straight. Realizing how close they were, Roxanne was startled for a moment and the color rose on her cheeks. Thank you, Mr. Damaris. Jack narrowed his eyes and scrutinized her. Something seems to be on your mind, Miss Jarvis. Roxanne shook her head, trying to appear calm. It's nothing. I was just careless just now, as she said before lowering her head to check the medicinal herbs in her arms. Thank goodness nothing happened to the herbs. She sighed in relief. It's just a few bottles of medicinal herbs. You should be more concerned about your own safety if such incidents happen in the future. It's not like the Damaris family can't afford the medicinal herbs. Besides, compared to the herbs, a person like you is more precious, Jack said with a frown. Roxanne flashed him a small smile. Thank you. I will be more careful next time. Then, she gave Jack a slight nod before entering the storage room with the medicinal herbs. Colby was a few steps behind them. When he reached the door to the storage room, he coincidentally saw the scene where Jack held Roxanne up. Immediately, he froze in his tracks when he saw their intimate pose, and his face clouded over. I wonder what Roxanne's reaction would be if it was me holding her up. With the efforts of the 4 people, all the medicinal herbs were quickly transferred to the storage room. After moving the last bottle of medicinal herbs, Roxanne walked to a corner and looked at her phone. There was nothing on her screen. There were no missed calls, much less a reply from Lucian. She stared at her blank screen for a few seconds and stubbornly wondered if she should call Archie and Benny and ask about it. Just then, she heard the sound of footsteps behind her and turned to look. Jack and Colby were walking over together while chatting. Meeting her eyes, they stopped talking and smiled at her. Roxanne frowned. She kept her phone and made her way to them. What are you two doing here? She asked in confusion. You disappeared in a flash after we finished moving the medicinal herbs, so we had to find you, Jack replied. Sorry, I was busy with something, so I left first and forgot to tell you. Sorry for making you worry. Jack nodded nonchalantly. It's all right. I'm glad you're fine. Colby's eyes darkened for a moment before quickly returning to normal as he looked at Roxanne. Dr. Jarvis, since we're all here, why don't we check out the equipment we were talking about 2 days ago? Colby suggested after a while. As the Research Institute needed some new medical equipment, Roxanne and Colby had been speaking at length about this matter. Unfortunately, Roxanne had been busy with Damaris Group's project and hadn't had the time to see the equipment. Now, hearing Colby's suggestion, she felt a little hesitant. I promised Archie and Benny that I would return as soon as possible, plus I'm not in the mood to work anymore. Even if I go to see the equipment, I may not be able to concentrate. Just when she was wondering how to reject Colby, Jack's voice rang out. I almost forgot, but Archie and Benny are not feeling well, so Miss Jarvis must be worried. If it's not urgent, she can take a look at it another day. I can also accompany you too, he said considerately with a smile as he sauntered toward Roxanne. A grateful look appeared on Roxanne's face when she heard that. She didn't know why Jack had helped her find an excuse, but she went along with it. Sorry, Dr. Galloway, but I'm not free today. It's all my fault. I knew Archie and Benny were sick, yet I still got you to help me with this. They must resent me for this, Jack chimed in. Roxanne immediately shook her head. They won't. They're very understanding. Then she turned to Colby. Getting new equipment for the Research Institute is not that urgent, so we can check it out in a few days. If you're in a hurry, you can take a look first, and if there's a company you like, we can check it out together at a later date. There was a note of finality in her voice. Since Archie and Benny were sick, Colby had no reason to refuse and could only relent while pretending to be thoughtful. I see. I sensed there was something off with you today. Turns out Archie and Benny are not feeling well. Please send them my regards. I'll visit them when I'm free. I will, Roxanne replied, smiling appreciatively. She then waved them goodbye before striding out of the Research Institute and hailing. After watching as Roxanne got into the taxi, Jack turned around and glanced at the man beside him with a frown. Judging by their interactions earlier, Jack could tell that the man seemed to be interested in Roxanne. However, his identity was slightly concerning. Jack took a sidelong glance at Colby with a hint of mockery flashing across his eyes. It was not until the taxi disappeared from his eyesight that Colby finally withdrew his gaze and met Jack's. Mr. Damaris. A rather unusual feeling surged within Colby at that moment, but he quickly suppressed it. Jack calmly withdrew his gaze and nodded in response. Mr. Damaris, you seem to know what is bothering Dr. Jarvis, Colby started. Otherwise, he would not have stepped in and helped Roxanne out of the situation before she could say anything. Besides, the two were clearly together before arriving at the research institute. Jack merely ached a brow in response. Dr. Galloway, what are you trying to say? Colby could hear the hidden hint of disdain in Jack's tone. Anger swelled in him, but he forced himself to suppress it. After a few seconds, he said calmly, I think Dr. Jarvis might be troubled with something related to Mr. Farwell. Earlier, Dr. Jarvis' expression turned slightly grim when I talked about Herbscape Group with her. Jack scrutinized him without agreeing or disagreeing with what he said. Instead, he acted surprised and cocked a brow. Is that so? I don't think I paid attention to that. In other words, Jack was mocking Colby for putting all his attention on Roxanne. Colby intended to stir up conflict between Jack and Lucian so that he could take advantage of the rivalry and win Roxanne over. However, he did not expect Jack to beat him to it by mocking him for what he just said. He frowned and stared at Jack warily. Mr. Damaris, what do you mean by that? Jack raised his brows. Nothing. I'm just curious. Dr. Galloway, you seem to understand a lot about Miss Jarvis. Despite not knowing much about Roxanne's past, Colby refused to show weakness in front of Jack. A brief moment of silence later, Colby nodded calmly in response to that. Jack curled his lips into a meaningful smile. Really? Dr. Galloway, I always thought you were only colleagues with Miss Jarvis. Then, he deliberately put on an apologetic look. After hearing what you said, I finally realized I'd misunderstood your relationship all this while. But then, what is going on between Miss Jarvis and Mr. Farwell? Dr. Galloway, why did you make it sound as though they got into a fight? Colby frowned at that. He knew there must be something going on between Roxanne and Lucian. Otherwise, Lucian would not have shown up at her place in the middle of the night and stood forward to help her when she was targeted by the public. Colby believed Lucian must be pursuing Roxanne. However, judging from Jack's tone, he reckoned there must be more beyond his understanding of the two. He could not help thinking there was something more behind Roxanne and Lucian's relationship. When he came to that realization, his face fell. Jack stared at him in amusement. Dr. Galloway, what's wrong? Well, you can choose not to tell me if it's something you don't feel comfortable sharing. Jack had spent much effort to finally find out more about Lucian and Roxanne's relationship. Roxanne and the Farwell family had been keeping their relationship a secret from everyone else. Only a few individuals were aware of it. Jack was confident that Colby was not among the few individuals who knew about their relationship. Colby had only played along with what Jack had said because he suspected Jack's relationship with Roxanne. He intended to make Jack feel jealous of Lucian. If a fight broke out between Jack and Lucian over this, Colby could benefit from the rivalry, as he would surely have one lesser love rival.
Colby's expression changed again and again. After a long moment he finally said awkwardly, "This is Dr. Jarvis' privacy. Mr. Damaris, I only brought it up to you because I thought you knew about it. But it seems to me now that you aren't aware of it, so let's drop that topic." Jack raised his brows and glanced at Colby. The dubious look in his eyes was enough to tell what he was thinking at that moment. Colby was startled for a few seconds, feeling embarrassed. However, on second thought, he knew he would have to get in the Damaris family's good book if he wanted to soar to a career height on par with Roxanne's. Suppressing the unpleasant emotions in his heart, he started sharing his history with Roxanne. "I met Dr. Jarvis when she was living abroad, and we worked together multiple times after that. After returning to the country, I thought I would lose contact with Dr. Jarvis. But surprisingly, she returned to the country shortly after I did. She even started operating this research institute with me." As he spoke, he casually took in Jack's expression. Although it hasn't been long since Dr. Jarvis returned to the country, she and I have worked and solved many issues together. He made it clear that he was very close with Roxanne. On one hand, he wanted to use his connections with Roxanne to get closer to the Damaris family. On the other hand, he wanted to instill more convincing points in what he had said earlier to salvage his dignity. Jack maintained a neutral expression and listened to everything Colby said. Then he smiled. "So, Dr. Galloway, I guess it's safe for me to assume you're pretty close with Ms. Jarvis." Colby smiled in response to that but said nothing. Jack went on, "But then your relationship seems strictly business. You don't seem to interact much with her beyond your work." Colby stiffened up at that. It was true that he did not interact much with Roxanne out of work, and that was what had been troubling Colby all this while. Technically speaking, Colby had known Roxanne for a time frame not shorter than Jack knew Roxanne, but Colby had only gone to her place once to give her medicine when she needed it. Even then, he had only stood in her courtyard instead of being invited inside. As for Roxanne's children, he had also only met them a few times when Roxanne brought them to the research institute while living abroad. He hadn't seen them ever since returning to the country. On the other hand, Jack seemed pretty close with the kids despite not knowing them for too long. He even knew when the kids had fallen sick. Colby could not help thinking about how close Jack was with Roxanne, and jealousy started brewing wildly within him. "It's getting late now. Dr. Galloway, I should get going if you have nothing else." Jack could not be bothered by Colby's inner thoughts. He bade goodbye to him, turned around, and got into his car. Although the Damaris family was prominent in the medical field, Jack was more of a businessman. He could effortlessly read Colby's emotions by just observing his expression. Seeing that Jack had gotten inside his car, Colby snapped back to his senses. His eyes were filled with fury as he watched Jack drive away. He refused to think Jack did not understand his intention after he told him so many things. He believed Jack understood his message but decided not to interfere. Even so, Jack could have changed the topic or cut him off directly, but he did not do that. Instead, he had allowed Colby to keep talking as he watched him in amusement. Thinking back on how Jack had inadvertently led him to continue telling him more, Colby angrily slammed his fist on the research institute wall. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.